Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to implement a Google sign-in for your ASP Core Web API application. So this actually took me a very long time to implement, so I'm hoping that I can provide some people a very clear way of getting this done for your ASP Core application. So the first place you're going to want to start up is the Google Sign-On API documentation. So over here, this is going to depend on how you're doing it. So I did it through the web. And then you're just going to want to find how to implement it for a server-side app. So over here, this is going to be different for most people depending on how your front end is handled. But the important part is that when we successfully sign a user in on our front end is that we call this grant offline access method. This method is going to provide us with the token that we are going to want to pass to the Google API once again, back to the API, so they can tell us which user is signed in once again. So this is just a secure way of passing the signed in Google user from your front end to your back end. So just a quick example of how I did this in the front end. So I have this Vue application here. It's just a simple website, just basic Vue template. I just deleted the hello world and put in this Google button here. So the Google button just basically follows the documentation. So I create a button here with an ID Google Auth button. So when this button gets mounted, I call that load method that was back inside of this documentation. Pass it the API key or the client ID, I think is what it's called for the Google sign-in, and then attach a click handler to the button. Does the success method is the important one, which is this Google Auth success method. It passes a Google user, or I call it a Google user, call it whatever you want, just whatever, make it make sense. And then we call the get auth response object method, and we start in this object over here, and inside this object we can get something called the ID underscore token, and that is what we send to our server. So over here, I have an ASP Core Web API function that we call that just takes in this token and calls the Google API to authenticate that user via the token. So that is going to be right here. So I have this test function over here. I pass the token. This object over here in this method that you're going to want to call is coming from, where are you? This Google API's auth package over here that you can get via over here. So again, all this will be linked in the video description. So just install this package over here, and then you'll have access to this Google API auth library, where there you can pass a token, call this function exactly like this. All you have to do is give it the token, create an instance of this Google JSON Web Signature validation settings object where you give it your client ID once again. And then when this runs, you should have access to your Google users. So let's just go over to this web page, hit sign in. All right, that's our token over there. And then we hit a debug statement here that I put before that it will execute. And if we look at this object over here, we notice that we have successfully passed the token over to our ASP Core application. And now you can start storing user information from here on. So mainly this subject over here is going to be your user's Google ID, and this is what you're going to want to store in your database. And I might do a separate video on this, but just in case you're using identity, you're going to want to create a user login info object where you give it the provider name, the Google user's ID. This is copy and pasted from some old code, so ignore that name there. That should be that subject from over here. And then just once again, the provider accept just all caps. I think that's the way it was supposed to be done. I think the other way you can get the provider name is, I think you can get it somewhere in here. I think you could have, but I might have been wrong. Yeah, it looks like I'm wrong. And then once you create that user info login info object, you can now call the user manager and call the add login async object where you pass the instance of an identity user and the user info object that you just created, and this will create the link between the Google user and your ASP core identity user. And then later on, you can sign them in again by, again, calling this, passing the token, calling this method, and then validating them by passing the provider and the Google ID. And then you're good to go. Ta-da! Oh, that's just a course error. Ignore that. Anyways, hope you guys all have a good day. Like, comment, subscribe.